All right, greetings everybody and welcome to Conflict Radio. Today is April 15th, 2021. We've got Jared Murphy's going to co-host with us, and we also have John let me see here. I got to bring up my notes have completely gone away. John Kachuba. Did I say that right?
You did, yes.
Okay, John Kachuba is with us. He is an author and paranormal investigator. He is a certified ghost hunter and has investigated over 80 haunted locations in the last 3 years. He is a frequent guest on radio, television, and a noted speaker at paranormal conferences. John has also written books unrelated to the paranormal and teaches creative writing at Ohio University. He lives in Cincinnati, one of America's most haunted towns. Now, John, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing well, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's awesome to have you on, man. We also have Jared with us. Jared was a little late getting to us because of some stuff going on in Minnesota where he lives. Jared, can you give us a shout out real quick, say hello, and explain to us why the tardiness today?
Dog ate my homework, everyone. It's good to hear you guys, and of course everyone listening. Thanks for tuning in. We have, of course, I don't think anyone in the country doesn't know about the Derek Chauvin trial, which is in closing arguments and or soon to be sequestered jury for an outcome, yay or nay, on the guilt of the police officer that killed or is accused of killing George Floyd. Where we stand on it. The reality is that trial's wrapping up, and that would have been easy enough, except I happen to live in the city of Minneapolis. So for everybody wondering, yes, I know people, 1 degree of separation. I know a couple of people who I'm actually surprised knew George Floyd. And then, unfortunately, so I live in Northeast, or well, I'm working in a part of the city where there isn't a problem currently. However, there's National Guard everywhere because a couple nights ago now, we've had 4 nights of unrest because another officer of 26 years or so accidentally, at least according to the body cam, according to the official statement, there was a traffic stop with another young man that unfortunately the police officer mistook their taser for a gun and shot them and killed them on Monday night, which led to another riot in a city. A lot of people who don't know the Twin Cities, they're called the Twin Cities because Minneapolis and St. Paul are very close together within 7 miles. And we call it the 7-county metro area because half the state basically lives in 7 counties. And everybody is very distinct, but we pack about 3.5-ish million people in 7 counties with many cities, and Brooklyn Center is a very close city. It touches Minneapolis, so they're calling it a suburb of Minneapolis, but it is a very distinct city. You have to get on some freeways, but you can connect there from where I'm physically sitting. And the entire of what they've called up for the National Guard, we now have armed, fully armed National Guard are walking the streets of Minneapolis, assorted areas, certain state and county roads. They are literally patrolling in armored vehicles. And, we had curfews for 3 nights because of what just happened Monday night. I mean, we're not even to the end of the week. Some businesses have had to board back up. And so to give everybody where it's at tonight, there is no official curfew, but people pretty much are treating it like the purge as far as either being home or being at work or basically not being out and about. And I don't know if that's really good because places that would never normally be broken into, and this is the saddest part, there is legit or otherwise, there are quite riotous protests going on in the Brooklyn Center, downtown, where the police station is and what's going on in Brooklyn Center is going on in Brooklyn Center. But you have to drive, for everyone who's not from the Twin Cities, you have to intentionally drive to get to uptown, these areas in there are many boroughs in Minneapolis, and to get to the places where they went. And the places that were broken into were shopping sprees for people who call themselves protesters. These were not protesters protesting for Black lives. These were not protesters going after people's rights, like trying to make a statement about minorities or anyone being mistreated by the police. This is not what happened. What happened is the incident in Brooklyn Center, many miles away. And I know a lot of people, they're trying to make a comparison between George Floyd, that it was only 12 miles away, and in the Twin Cities. That's like saying, like anyone who's familiar with New York or LA or a large metropolitan area, when you say 12 miles in New York, that's like another universe. And that's exactly what it's like here in the Twin Cities. These are not close places. They are very far apart. And the destruction that's gone on since, for the most part, outside of the actual protest at the Brooklyn Center area, has been very mostly nefarious people shopping for, going to the Cricket mobile store, going to the grocery store, which is now boarded up again, robbing hardworking individuals at night from their actual what's in their pocket. It hasn't been an organized protest. It's been various nefarious groups going specifically to businesses with smartphones, going for cash registers. And it's very frustrating, because then this weird dichotomy is going on where you have people right now, like where I am, there are people going for their evening walk and walking their dog. And yet pretty soon the sun's about to go down, and we're going to have another night of rioting in Brooklyn Center that has spilled over into various roaming shootouts and gunplay, all the way into, I described one neighborhood in Minneapolis that is it's a very considered wealthy artistic area, and it's an area where you are safe at night. You can go out shopping, you can go out walking. We have a lot of lakes in the Twin Cities, and this particular area, you could walk at midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. and you would never, ever experience a trouble or problem. And now we have armed National Guard and State Patrol.
Let me ask you a question about that, Jared, because I don't want to take too much time away from John.
Sure.
But let me ask you I want to ask you two questions, and then we'll see if John wants to ask you anything. The first question is, do they have roadblocks set up? Are they randomly stopping people, the National Guard, at all? And two, what is your anxiety level there as you wait for the coming weeks ahead?
Well, anxiety level is actually it's low when, the people in my life are on the same page about where are we physically driving. Like, if you're going to go to a store, what route do you take home if a route that you considered very safe is now experiencing gunplay? So how do you drive home with that? So that's a frustration. And then, wait, what was the National Guard question again?
Do they have checkpoints set up where they're stopping cars at all?
No, not yet. They have blocked off exits and roads already, though, and they'll just wave you past. So they've used trucks, semis. There have been block offs, especially the first night when this officer shot, and the rioting started Monday night. I think it was Monday night, and then as far as anxiety level goes, like you said, there's the largest settlement in police history or in city history. Minneapolis actually self-insures itself. They literally didn't even have the money to make this $27 million settlement, give or take, rounding it for everyone listening, for George Floyd family. But the reality is that you have the largest settlement in history. You have a guy that's going to go to jail. And I think what's really going to be interesting is to watch. If you're here to protest, then why aren't you at the city council's office? Why aren't you at the mayor's office? Why aren't you at the governor's? There's a very public location for the governor's mansion, and you could do peaceful protesting. You could stand vigils all night long at the leaderships. But instead, what's going on is you have people just shopping at stores, breaking into Apple stores, breaking into Targets, breaking into places of commerce to get what they feel they deserve. It's not people protesting in a way that is, again, it's not about my take on it. I'm just saying that, if you want to take to the streets by 100,000 people, and we did that, I posted a video about that on Not Aliens. There's tens of thousands of people protesting for George Floyd. But, what's going on in the next couple of weeks is, if he comes back with a guilty, give me the excuse for rioters to go bananas to steal from stores, versus saying, hey, this isn't right, and we're going to we're going to fight until justice is served. And it's like, okay, well, unfortunately, there's no replacing a human being once you take them. You have the largest settlement, and now this guy's going to jail. So the excuse for anyone other than violent people to bust up the city, my anxiety is more anger in the leadership of this city and the government here in Minnesota allowing an autonomous zone and allowing what they did the last protest period here. There are many people. It's not an opinion. It's just there was different ways to manage this, and it just wasn't done. And it appears this time my anxiety is lower because I think that they're going to manage it very differently. They are not going to tolerate. I have not ever seen the National Guard out before like this. It's very different this time. So for everyone who wants to sit back in armchair and popcorn this, I mean, the Chauvin trial is almost over, but now this woman this police officer Potter that shot this, now we have this whole Monday thing, and it's just terrible. It's just one thing after another.
We'll see how long the jury's probably going to get it on Monday. So I mean, we'll see how long they actually take to sort things out. I want to give a shout out to Jewel is in here, Adonai, Joe Knox, Hot Sauce is here, Roach is here, Benjamin Clark, who's a new member. Thanks Benjamin for signing up. Lee Palace, how you doing? Chuck Bam, Blue Chicken, Journey Through the Gate, Paranormal Portal Podcast is here. Hugh is here. Spartano Negative, how you doing? I did get your shirt. I'll be mailing that tomorrow. John Clark, how you doing? Good to see you. Great seeing everybody here. John, do you have any questions for Jared regarding the Minneapolis stuff? He's living right there.
Yeah, not really any questions, but it's reminiscent of issues we had here in Cincinnati several years ago, where we also had a black man that was shot and killed, and the circumstances were dubious, to say the least. And there was rioting for several days, and we had the same thing where, people had to be called in to control it. And I think, like every case like this, you do get people that are opportunists and take advantage of a situation for their own benefit, which has nothing to do with legitimate protesting or with issues of justice or right or wrong or racism or whatever. It's just, what can I get for myself? And unfortunately, the media likes to always focus on those people and sort of, I would say, smear everybody else. By that, I mean the people who are legitimately and peacefully protesting. And as Jared said, there's probably thousands of people, not just in Minneapolis, but probably across the United States, that have been protesting this. I mean, think of the whole Black Lives Matter movement that we've seen over the last year. Millions of people, right, nationwide out there protesting 99% of the time peacefully with no issues. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any questions. It's just, we've seen this again. We keep seeing it again and again. And I don't know if I knew what the answer was to solve it all, I would tell everybody. Yeah. But I don't know what it is.
Well, even if you knew the answer and tried to tell everybody, half of the people would disagree with you whether or not you had the right answer. All right, so let's just move on from all that. We've got John with us. We're going to talk shapeshifters, and werewolves and vampires and all kinds of stuff. John, why don't you give us a quick rundown of your latest book, I suppose, Shapeshifters. What's it about? How you got started on the subject, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. So Shapeshifters is subtitled A History, and it's a nonfiction book that takes a look at the character of a shapeshifter in cultures all around the world, from ancient times, actually prehistoric times, up to today, including some of the modern theories about shapeshifters and some of the more offbeat, I don't want to call them conspiracy theories, but in a way they sort of are, about shapeshifters. I got into this because my previous paranormal books have been about ghosts and ghost hunting. There's five books in print about that now that I've written over the years. And I'm a frequent speaker at universities and libraries on shows like this about ghosts, about the paranormal. And invariably, when it came to Q&A, either online or in person, people would always ask me about entities that they have encountered or heard about, or sometimes even had, pictures of it they would show me. And they would say, so, what kind of is this a ghost? What is this? And when they would describe what they saw or their experience, or when I'd look at what they were presenting me, I would often say, I don't think you're talking about a ghost here. This seems to me to be more like what we'd consider shapeshifters. And so I heard that more and more from people, and I started asking myself, what is the interest in shapeshifters? Why is this such a popular character? And so as I looked into it, as you have no surprise, it's in literature, it's in books, they're in movies, there's songs about shapeshifters. There's food products that are either called shapeshifter or called werewolf this or werewolf that or vampire this or vampire that. TV shows, toys for kids. The whole idea of the shapeshifter has infiltrated our society in so many different areas, so many different levels. And it's done that in other countries as well. So that was the basis when I started doing this thing. Okay, so what is this about? So what I did was I took a look at, I guess, how would I say it? Sort of how shapeshifters appear in folklore and in mythology, how they appear in world religions, because they do. I looked at the more pop culture ideas of, Boris Karloff as a vampire, or Twilight series, or those kinds of things. My favorite, old Lon Chaney as the original Wolfman. So I looked at pop culture like that, and what that was all about. And basically, I have a lot of history in this book, in terms of historical sightings of different types of shapeshifters, as well as just what people believed was happening and wrote down as either mythology, or with ancient Greeks and Romans and some of the ancient civilizations, what was actually their religion and not so much mythology. So kind of in a nutshell, it's what it is. I also guess I looked at the psychology of shapeshifters, and this was something that Michael, you and I started talking about a little before we went on air, which is what is it about the shapeshifter character that appeals to us? What is it that makes it such an indelible character in cultures all around the world? And as I said, from earliest times to today, I mean, it's a very resilient, long-lasting character. So what does that say about us? Why do we have that attraction to a shapeshifter? Why do we continue to write novels about shapeshifters and produce TV shows and movie shows about shapeshifters? Why do we dress up at Halloween? Why do we go to things like, why do we do cosplay events at, Comic-Con or places like this? Why do people dress up as, people from the Lord of the Rings or whatever? So I cover a wide spectrum here of what a shapeshifter is and what it's about. So it's pretty much open to anything.
All right. So when you were doing your research for the book, you weren't just looking at all of the stories. You were looking for an origin of the story, right?
In a lot of cases, I was. In fact, for my research, I was in 7 countries in Europe. I was in France, Italy, Portugal. I went to Belarus. Nobody goes to Belarus. I went to Ukraine, Romania. And a lot of these places, I was tracking down either werewolf or vampire stories primarily. Well, some of the other shapeshifters too, but mostly werewolf and vampire stories, and trying to find a historical basis for them, or even just, as you said, their origination. Where did they come from? How did this story develop? How did it first get started?
Yeah.
It was interesting to be on the site, some of these places.
Oh, I can imagine. I want to go to Romania so bad. I just want to go to the whole Dracula castle and everything. I've been fascinated with that area and that whole story, the Vlad the Impaler and everything. I just I can't wait. One day I'm going to get out there and I'll stream it live on the channel for all y'all to see when I get out there. Just want to give a shout out to everybody. There's a ton of people in here. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. So, John, how far back were you able to, I guess, go with the research on this? You going back into even like Greek times with the Greek gods and all kinds of stuff? Were you able to get past farther back in time than that?
Yeah, I was. And it wasn't through any original research that I did, but just in doing my research, uncovering what people have written and discovered. And one of the earliest depictions, if not the earliest depiction of a shapeshifter, is from the Neolithic period. So we're talking, Stone Age, we're talking prehistoric man in a cave in France. And by the way, in my book, Shapeshifters, there's a lot of illustrations, photos that I've taken. In fact, you mentioned Romania. I took several photos of a lot of the Vlad the Impaler sites, and they're all in the book too. So, you not only get the information, but there's some illustrations there as well. But I do have an illustration also in the book of this particular shapeshifter that has been painted on a cave in France. And it's very interesting because what it shows, a creature standing on its hind legs, it looks like a deer for the most part, or maybe an elk. It's hard to say, but it's got large antlers, and it looks something like, like I said, a deer or an elk. But if you look at it closely, you'll notice that instead of it having hooves, it has fingers and toes.
Oh, that's kind of freaky.
And digits instead of a horned hoof, right, like a deer would have, or an elk or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And also the eyes on it, instead of being sort of, deer's eyes are fairly sort of the center. They're not so much bilateral. But this has that direct human, right in the middle of your face, looking directly at you, eyes, which is not the way deer look. So archaeologists and anthropologists are looking at this thing and saying, well, what is this and why is it painted on the cave wall? What they believe was that this was probably painted by some prehistoric shaman, and that it was what they call part of hunter magic. So what they believe would happen would be that the shaman would gather the hunters who were going to go out and hunt deer or elk, whatever this thing is painted on the wall. This was their prey. They're going to go out and hunt it. So what they would do is, the shaman would paint this thing and he'd do his chanting or whatever. There's a good reason to believe that prehistoric man, like so many others later on, probably discovered some natural hallucinogenics from the environment. Mushrooms or something else, and they probably ate those and went into this almost trance-like state with this shaman sort of leading them. And what would happen was they would believe, and again, this is all theory, they would believe that they would have been transformed themselves into that animal, into a deer or to an elk. And that makes sense as a hunter, right? I mean, if you think of Native American culture, a lot of times they'd wear a wolf skin and they'd crawl on all fours by a buffalo herd because the buffalo would look at them and say, oh, that's a wolf. I don't have to worry. It's not a guy with a bow and arrow, right? So if you can get up to your prey as an animal, you have a much better chance of succeeding in the hunt. So they believe that's what was going on. So now, was this actual shape-shifting? Of course not. I mean, these prehistoric hunters didn't actually suddenly sprout antlers and everything else, but they believe they did. And so in my book, when I talk about shapeshifters, and I should just stop and say, give a real simple definition. The way I define this shapeshifter very simply is a person who has the ability to transform himself into an animal or another person or even an inanimate object, and then also be able to That's a very simple definition. But within that, I broke it down to what I call internal shapeshifters and external shapeshifters. So these prehistoric hunters would have been examples of internal shapeshifters, meaning that mentally, psychologically, they were deer or elk, whatever it was that they were hunting. physically, you looked at them, they looked like they always look. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. But for all practical purposes, they had become that animal, and they would act it out. And there's a lot of cases of internal shapeshifting we can talk about a little later on that are really interesting. But so that's the earliest idea of a shapeshifter that I came across. When you go into some of the classical civilizations, like the ancient Greek, Roman, Egyptian civilizations, you find there a plethora of gods and goddesses who are shapeshifters. Zeus, the Greek god of gods, is a prime example. I have probably 12 different examples of forms that he took throughout these Greek myths to basically, usually to seduce a woman, was his reason for it. But there's like at least 12 different forms that I found. You know, anything from an eagle to a mouse to another woman's husband looking like her husband, all kinds of things. So, and you also find that in Roman and Egyptian cultures as well. So it goes way back. There's even some instances or possible examples of shapeshifters that are mentioned in the Bible. The book of Daniel, for instance, in the Old Testament, talks about how King Nebuchadnezzar somehow got on the wrong side of God and was punished for that. And it said that basically he was sort of cast out. And I don't have the actual quote in front of me, but people can look it up. But it says something like his hands became claws. He was like a beast. He was out eating grass and eating dew, but he had turned into an animal. So it goes way back. We got those examples from way back.
All right. Jared, you wanna jump in here? I want to ask you a question on shapeshifters. Have you run into that in any of your ancient civilization work?
You know, just the same stories that we're talking about. And, you know, like you said, there's physical and mental, which I guess the cross topic, something that fascinated me in my early research in history that I think, John, I was going to ask about. So to answer the question and ask one to John, I find the concept of a berserker just hilarious and terrifying at the same time. And I know, John, you've talked about it before, but I do think that my first experience with really understanding that, like, I happen to love Vikings, the Monty Python version, when they had the berserker on the ship. But
Yeah.
the reality is that this is a serious weaponized human being. Is this not a true thing?
Yeah. Yes to both counts. Truly a weaponized human being, and yes, historically accurate. So the Berserkers, for the audience that may not know, were basically warriors in the Scandinavian countries who did similar things to the shaman that I just mentioned. Archaeologists have found some remnants in places where they thought Berserkers, camped or whatever, again, of the mushroom. I think I can never think of it's Amaranthus muscaris, I think. But anyway, a mushroom that causes hallucinogenic states. And it was believed that these berserkers would, again, ingest these hallucinogens and basically became, for all crazy people. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They were crazy. They divided themselves into wolf clan and bear clan. And when they went into battle, they were wearing the pelts, the headdresses or whatever of these animals. And in this altered mind state, believed that they had become a wolf or become a bear. And they were ferocious in battle. The various Scandinavian kings that had these guys used them as literally shock troops. I mean, they would put them up front, but they would also stand back because they knew that once these warriors started swinging their swords and axes, they were in a frenzy. And it almost didn't matter anybody that was in front of them went down. So, if you made the mistake, if you were an ally and you made the mistake of getting in their way, you probably got cut down too. It became so bad. They were so uncontrollable that the kings basically came together to outlaw berserker bands because they were uncontrollable. You couldn't manage them. And the funny thing is, they would go on this, they would take these hallucinogens and they would be these fierce warriors, absolutely ferocious, unstoppable. And then when it wore off, they were like good for nothing. I mean, they would literally be exhausted for weeks at a time. They were totally drained. So they had, kind of a short value window, I would say. But yeah, they were pretty awesome.
Well, that was my next question too, because what's the point if they're going to kill their if they're going to kill their own team? I wouldn't think that would go over well ultimately on the other side of the battle.
Right. You think of people today, you don't hear about it so much, but I can remember at one time I worked in a hospital emergency room, and I can remember getting some guys that would come in, something like PCB or something along those lines, and they'd come in, they'd be unbelievably difficult. I mean, it would take 6 or 7 people to just pin them down, Once it wore off, they were useless. But it didn't matter who you were. They couldn't understand or see that. They were in a state of mind that just said, I'm going to kill. I'm a bear. I'm a wolf. This is what I do. They had their drawbacks.
So John, I got a question for you. What's the not just oddest, but what's the most, there's always these stories and legends that I come across as, for all the research I've done and the work I've written, I find it fascinating. Sometimes I get stuck when I hear a story that gets quieted outside of its own folklore or own mythology, where it's like, there's a little bit of science in it. There's a little bit of story. There's a lot of story in it, but of the stories, of the examples of shape-shifting, is there one or a couple that stand out as being the ones that really kind of cross the divide, that have a sliver of science and a sliver and the mythologies and mythos with it?
That's an interesting question, because so much of the shapeshifter stories are, really when you get down to it, I mean, they really are stories. They're fantasy. Right. They're fiction. But I think if you go back, Jared, to what I was talking about in terms of internal shapeshifting, there are cases of lycanthropy, where people have believed and acted out as wolves, as werewolves. And when I say acted out, I don't mean just, crawling around, growling and snapping at people, which is what a lot of them did. But I mean, there's cases that I have in my book here, mostly from like 16th century, maybe a lot of them in France, a lot of them in Germany, where people, for whatever reason, believed that they had become werewolves, and they acted out accordingly to the point of murdering people barehanded, ripping them open, eating them. And this is documented stuff. It's real. They're real cases. Most of them in the early days were burned at the stake as being considered, devils or possessed or whatever. As time went by and people became a little more enlightened, they realized that what they were dealing with was just some mental condition, some psychological condition that, for whatever reason, and I still don't know if anybody knows why this happens, but it made them feel that way. And so they would be institutionalized rather than burned at the stake. But even up until there was a case like in 1976 or something of a man that felt he was a werewolf and had to be hospitalized. And in the hospital, rip his clothes off all the time, would crawl around on all fours, would growl and snap, and So, I mean, I think there's some science there, some history there. We know these things happen. We don't know why they happen, but you can see where that would also give rise to the whole idea of, or if not give rise, at least augment the idea of these other ferocious werewolf stories that are truly fictitious. If you have a case of a person that really does it, it's not much of a leap to say, well, I bet there's werewolves everywhere,
Do you think, John, that anybody can be a shapeshifter? Like, if you just believe you can change your shape, you can change it? Or do you think that maybe it's a interdimensional being that's just like hanging out over here, or it's normal for this realm? Or what do you think about that?
Well, there's a lot of questions there. First of all, Yeah, the first question is, can people actually transform themselves? And I think the answer to that, again, going to the internal shapeshifter, is yes. Can a person transform themselves physically as an external shapeshifter? Think of Werewolf of London and things like that, where you actually elongate your bones and break your skin and grow fur and hair. I think that's not possible, to be honest. I don't believe that happens. You mentioned interdimensional, and that's interesting because there was a guy that you may know, David Icke. You've probably heard the name.
Yeah.
Who is pretty much a conspiracy theorist on a lot of different things. But he has this theory about what he calls reptilian alien shapeshifters. And the idea being that millions of years ago, and he's got this whole, if you read his theory, he's got it very well.
Yeah, we lost
system
you.
These.
Yeah, we lost you for a second there.
Oh, okay. Am I still on?
Yeah, you're back. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So he has this whole story about even naming a specific star system where these aliens supposedly came from millions of years ago and came to Earth, and they were reptilian. They were able to change their shape from reptilian shape to human shape or whatever. And his theory was that they mated with, the proto-humans that were running around on our planet millions of years ago. And that it's as a result, there is a genetic strain of a shape-shifting gene, I guess you will, if you will, that some people haven't inherited. And so today, there are among us reptilian alien shapeshifters, according to David Icke. Yeah. And that they've taken positions of power in the world. He says Queen Elizabeth is one. I think he said Barack Obama. He had some weird other people too, like I forgot exactly who it was, but some pro athletes and things like this that he said are also reptilian alien shapeshifters. So I just throw that out there because when you said interdimensional beings or something, I thought of these alien things. Again, I can't believe any part of that. But
all right, well, I mean, I understand some of the stuff David talks about, and I'm sure Jared could probably comment on this as well. But it seems like none of his theories are based in any kind of evidence or fact at all, right?
Well, that's right. That's right. That's why I don't call them a theory. I just say they're stories because, a theory does require, some evidence, some observation that you say, well, if this happened, I wonder if this happens. And then you take your theory from there. But it's cut out of whole cloth here. I mean, it's a fabrication.
All right. Give a shout out to everybody. We got a ton of people in here. Hit that like button. And don't be afraid to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Jared, do you want to continue with what you were going at earlier?
Yeah, well, it's hard not to get off and really get the concept down of weaponized human berserkers. I think that was just I'm glad that they got as far as attempted execution in the field. Like, let's just make this work. But as far as the shape-shifting subject goes, John, where are you at right now? I mean, maybe, you're always doing research and work. What's your latest unrevealed twists on all of this right now, or thoughts on it?
On shapeshifters specifically? Yeah. I don't know if it's unrevealed. I think it's in the book, but I think what I'm interested in more now than anything is the psychology behind it. Again, some of the questions that I posed before. Why is the character so popular? Why are we enchanted with it? I mean, what's its attraction? And I think when you look at the psychology, a lot of the popularity of it, and so a lot of my new work is sort of looking at that, and not so much even thinking about sort of the stories, the mythological type of shapeshifters, or because I think what is more interesting is the possibility of anybody becoming a shapeshifter. And again, I put this in quotes because I'm not talking about a physical shapeshifter. I'm talking about that internal. But then if you're internal and believing it, you're still acting out that way. So for all practical purposes, you have shifted. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in more the let's say, potential capabilities of people to shift internally.
This is a happy subject for me because, you know, as I described in my book, It's Not Aliens, Worse, It's Us, Discovering Our Lost History. It's hard to describe. I know, big title, but it's hard to explain how does water and water consciousness to genetic memory and programming and synesthesias and different abilities that we think are just natural random phenomena when we have bizarre ancient cuts in our genome that we recognize even within mainstream science. And then we have, I think we all have a much more advanced past that we don't know. And that's the overall subject of my book, which is we reached a much higher epoch of technology and consciousness. And I think in that spectrum, in that zone, there were abilities consciously, you know, again, why is the pineal gland so, you know, why does it have ocular nerves? Why is it that we have a mystified third eye and abilities like synesthesia, where not only can you mix all five senses with abilities, but that you could actually touch, sense, and feel other people. So what would that mean if we have a sliver of truth in the Bible on we used to talk to animals? And when you have indigenous people saying, well, how old was that? Well, it was so long ago, it was when we could still speak with dogs. And when you mix all of that together, how hard is the mythology of shapeshifting around the idea of genetic memory, stored memories of not just our present past, or a lot of people, I think they like to dwell on, they are recalling their own personal experience in a past life, when it could be part of a collective human consciousness. It could be that they're pulling down or downloaded or part of a zip file. You know, the more humanity we have, the more human consciousness we have. I think there's a collective consciousness that we can draw on, is my current working theory in a nutshell, just for everyone listening. Just, this is high level. But then the idea of tapping into portions of it or memories of it, or current experiences of organisms or living things that I think once at one point lived in a much more terraformed and engineered planet, it would make it really easy for you to be experiencing, you know, not just some, like, you were raised by wolves or Tarzan, you know, like you were, you know, you literally have an immediate experience with a wolf pack or something, but that there's a possibility that there was a direct connection with other creatures, animals, etc., and it might have led into some of these mythos post Younger Dryas.
Well, I have to say, I agree with a lot of what you said. You know, I always think about going back to primitive man. You know, how is it that primitive man, who had no cell phones, no satellites, no TV, no radio, how is it that they would know when it was time for the mastodon herds to come through a certain valley? What keyed them into it? Now, you know, there's obviously there's physical cues and signs from nature around them they can take, but there's more than that. How is it that they were able to be sort of, as you would say, in communication in a way, to know that, okay, this is our time. If we go to this location, you know, the mastodons are going to come through and we'll have a hunt. What is it? We've got this huge brain that still a very small percentage of it is mapped out. We still really don't know what a lot of that gray matter is doing or why we have it. And I think that, to your point, Jared, there are a lot of, I don't know, I guess I'd call them senses. Let's just say abilities that primitive man had that we don't have, that puts us sort of in touch more with our surroundings, with other life forms, with nature generally. And I think that as technology has advanced and we've become smarter, and again, I'm going to put that in quotes, because we've become smarter in terms of knowledge that we've gained from experimentation, from books, from observation, but not necessarily in what I would consider sort of an organic way. But in any case, we become smarter, right? And as we become smarter, we develop more and more technology, which makes it easier for us to dissociate ourselves even further from our original, let's say, primordial roots, the abilities that we had, some that you mentioned before. And that's why I think there's a lot to be said for sort of Buddhist philosophy. And I'm going to say it with sort of a small b, because I'm not necessarily talking about pure Buddhist doctrine, but some of the ideas they have about mind and about using your mind and about meditation. And you mentioned, consciousness, and I think of what is sort of called the cosmic mind. And I do believe that there is like there is a cloud for data from a computer, but I think there's a cloud for our own mental data. And I think it's there, and I think we can tap into it. A lot of neurologists today even believe that what we call the mind is not an internal thing at all, but that it's external to us, and that we can all sort of tap into that. So I think there's a lot of abilities that we still have, but they're latent. They're.
And we lost you again.
Okay.
There.
We heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard there.
Okay. I don't know if you at the last part, but I was just saying that I think there's a lot of abilities that we have, that we all have, that are latent, dormant in a way, but that they can be accessed through training, through meditation or some other practices like that can get you there. So, bringing it all back to shapeshifting. Are there mental practices or mental abilities that we have that could help us to, again, internalize ourselves as shapeshifters? I still firmly believe we can't change our physical nature, but I do think that there might be some possibility of doing something internally. So we got a lot of points there that Jared mentioned, I mentioned. It's a lot. There's a couple of books in there.
Yeah, it's I'm working on the second and the third and revising the first as we speak. It's a tremendous amount of stuff to cover, because the premise we keep looking through this lens of, it's hard. I was raised a certain way. Everyone has a history attached to what they see, and the history is everyone was in loincloths and banging rocks 50,000 years ago and more, and the house of cards that is our history, it falls apart. First and foremost, it's, do you think aliens built it? Well, that's a straw man argument. That's not the point. It's about whether you acknowledge that a much larger and more complex history includes a much more technologically advanced society. And then we have an anatomically correct human record that shows the timeline that we were told, and again, it's so interesting, told and taught is a theory. And now something that we're more open to, and this is why I think it gets more airtime, is what you just talked about, is the genetic capabilities, the quantum research that goes on, where they're like, it looks like you have, from this Carillion photo, you appear to have a complete aurora around you, based on research dating back to the 40s. A mature and adult, right, either seed, as a seed or an egg, even unfertilized, showed a magnetic blueprint to build a living entity. And the question is, okay, is that random? Is it natural? Is it part of a design system? And if we were more advanced, and right now, where we are now, we're creating designer babies, and we think of technology as in the things we're on now and the internet, that all this external. I mean, if we were having this with the abilities of synesthesia, we could even experience, right now, there's, for the number of people listening, you literally could experience, 67 people watching now, at least on my end, that says, what if we were all able to sense each other in the same room? And also not only sense, but taste what everybody was eating, and or say a name or say a color or hear a sound and see a color or hear or taste a flavor, in the weirdest, trippiest things, where we have these abilities, and either they're random, as we're described in the history of evolution, or again, the theory of evolution, and it gets so commonplace to change it. And it's not that evolution couldn't have happened the way we're describing, it's just that you have to account for anatomically correct humans at the Red Crag and at Table Mountain, and well described in Michael Cremo's Forbidden Archaeology. And so when you take the facts, and like you said, not the stories, but when you take the facts we have and put them on the table, well, it doesn't fit the standard narrative. And then, well, now take these genetic abilities and these things we're learning in quantum mechanics, and we're learning about these abilities, and then now look back at these slivers of truths and shadows of reality in these stories and these mythos, and we start to see elements of actual genetic abilities, where if we have a society that can move 1,000 ton stones and build them in a very complex way, and again, not knowing the rest of the material sciences, genetically, we have ancient cuts to our genome where it's like, well, somebody did this, but they did it, well, LOL, they did it 15,000 years ago. Okay. And we didn't know we had a double helix DNA strand. Oh, it turns out we have a quad helix. Turns out there's altered states of water. Turns out that water seems to have consciousness. Turns out that whether you're working with a healer or magnetic fields, you can, what we're learning or relearning about the universe we live in, I think falls definitely into this, what looks like wizard Merlin. It looks like, do you want to create a plant? Do you want to grow a plant? Do you want to grow a human? Do you want to shift or change into something? Is that an ancient lost nanotechnology? And is it at the cellular level, or is it an external technology, that we think of as a pill, a shot, plastic surgery? We're very crude in our methodologies currently, despite now having designer babies.
Well, we do have, isn't the same thing that makes up our bodies what makes up this desk, and what makes up the wall, and what makes up a house or a tree? It's just a matter of, mixing together matter in a way that you want it to. So if you were highly advanced, couldn't you just, not only shapeshift yourself, but shapeshift other things all around you?
There's a morality in that, and I think Kurzweil in The Singularity is Near gets right into it. It's like, can you imagine a point where somebody has more diabolical or nefarious intentions, if you don't take the latest designer software biological update for your biology, that you could catch not a random virus, but a program nanobot that's going specifically for people who are 5'3", purple, too tan, too short, too tall, too big, male, female, you fill in the blank, and you could design things that specifically go after human beings, or animals or plants, or you name it. And without the proper software or programming, you are dealing with a society. Imagine waking up one day and you're no longer you. Your genes were attacked by a nano storm of nano factories that are just atoms and fragments of atoms in size, and you wake up and you don't look like you look like you're in the Peanuts or Rick and Morty. Well, that sounds ludicrous, but literally you could.
Well, what do you think, John? They don't just shapeshift from like a being to a different being. I've heard of stories of people shapeshifting in the water. I've heard all kinds of stories about them turning in all different things. Can they just pick what they want to turn into, or some of them can and some of them can't, or what?
Well, again, looking at the stories, the fairy tales, the folk tales, mythology, the answer is basically that, a shapeshifter who is in control of his ability to shift, and I'll say what I mean about that in a minute, can literally can literally transform into anything they want. If you look at some of the Japanese folk tales about this, it's really interesting. I got interested in some of the Japanese paranormal stories because of their ghosts. They have a fantastic variety of ghosts, and levels of ghosts, and different types of ghosts. Here we say ghost, and it's a ghost. But there's like, hundreds of different kinds of ghosts. But almost every one of those Japanese ghosts are also shapeshifters, which is interesting. So you have a typical Japanese story is the story of a woman who is murdered by her husband. And later on, he picks up with another woman. And so the ghost of the first wife comes back, and she finds the two of them together, and she kills them. But the way she does it is usually by transforming herself into, like, maybe one of the guys, warriors, or even maybe transforming herself into that other woman, the new woman. And then doing her deed as a transformed ghost, which is interesting. But most of the shapeshifters are capable of even shifting into inanimate objects. Again, these are the ones from stories. These are shapeshifters that are primarily endowed with sort of magical abilities. So they're sorcerers, they're witches, they're shamans, they're gods or they're goddesses. So you have those, and they have that ability. But then you have the other poor souls that you read about a lot in fairy tales. The handsome prince who's turned into a frog, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's shapeshifting, but not by his will. It's a curse, right? Because usually it's an evil witch or somebody like that who casts a spell on him and changes him into a frog. And then, of course, we all know the story. A beautiful princess has to come, and think of the Beauty of the Beast and the Frog Prince and all that. The love of a good woman will restore the guy back to his human form again. So there's a whole variety of them in all the folk tales and mythology that you have. It really runs the gamut.
So it's just a matter of matter manipulation, really. I mean, it seems like shapeshifters can not only shape themselves, but shape other beings around them, hence the frog or things like that, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I guess that might be a good point. Like, you talk about a frog. So the prince did not change himself, obviously, right? So it was an outside source. And usually the stories talk about it being a witch or, like I said, a sorcerer or something that does that. And usually those people have the power themselves to shapeshift. So it's interesting that it seems that power is transferable by people who have it, at least according to the fairy tales like that.
Yeah.
Because no prince would say, you know what, I think I'd much rather be a frog. Probably not, right? So that's interesting.
So if you're a shapeshifter, you can shapeshift, and you can shapeshift other people. Couldn't you also shapeshift other things? Like, say, for instance, if it's just a matter of matter manipulation, right, couldn't you, say, take a block from the pyramid and dematerialize it and then materialize it where it needs to be, and maybe even build the pyramid that way?
Well, I mean, that's certainly a hypothetical. I would say that there are stories, not necessarily with the pyramids, but there are stories of objects being changed into other objects and moved and everything. So it's in the folklore. And folklore always has some basis of truth to it.
So you're saying
pretty obscure.
You're saying it's possible.
Well, I'm saying it's possible. Yeah, I'm not saying it's possible. I'm saying that that at least in the stories it's there. And you made a point though earlier, Michael, too, about we're the same as the desk and the same as a wall and the same as an animal. I mean, matter is matter, right? We know that there's only a certain not number, but a certain variety of atoms that we are, but those same atoms are in everything else too. So I suppose in that sense they're interchangeable.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I suppose, what could you tell us some of the most, I guess, what would be the most popular, or I guess collaborated shape-shifting story from the past, like that has the most witnesses or something like that?
There's one from France that is well documented. I'm just trying to think of what I really call that. I mean, it's in my book, so I guess I'll go with it. It was in the 18th century, like mid-18th century or so, and it was in some remote areas of southern France, in the Midi, And this thing was, there was a beast, and the people called it the Beast of Gévaudan, which was a village in this area. And this thing was roaming French villages for about a year. And was described as basically a wolf. They were saying a very large wolf. Other people were saying, well, we're not sure if it was a wolf or maybe it was even a lion. Well, there were not lions roaming around in France at that time, you know. So this beast was roaming through these villages and basically attacking people left and right. And over the period of little more than a year, they attributed 100 deaths of villagers to this beast, to this animal, whatever it was they were calling it. And it got to the point, I forgot which, it was one of the Louis, I forgot which Louis, I forgot his number, but King Louis, whatever number he was, actually sent troops to France, to the southern part of France here, to try to track this thing down because it was so notorious and it was creating such havoc. And the troops were unsuccessful, although there was one royal huntsman who accompanied them and did kill some kind of a large wolf that they brought back to the palace in Versailles, the Palace of Versailles. And they claimed to the king, this was it, we got it. You know, we got this thing and it was just a big wolf and no problem. Well, the king had it mounted and stuffed and it was in the palace for a while. But meanwhile, back in the southern part of France, the killings continued. So they didn't get the right thing. And people were saying that, you know, they were seeing this beast and it was creating an unbelievable panic. There was a local hunter named Jean Chastel who decided to go out after this thing. Now, stories say, and this is the part that, you know, starts getting a little unverifiable. Stories say that he melted down some silver and made silver bullets to go after this beast. Long story short is he did go after the Beast of Gévaudan and apparently ended up shooting some huge, I'm going to call it a wolf right now, a huge wolf. And he kept a diary, a journal. And in the journal, he said that when he examined the body, the corpse of this thing, if you remember way back we began this interview, I talked about that cave painting of the deer with the fingers and toes, right, where there should have been hooves. Chastel said in his diary that as he examined it, he said there was something odd about the paws of the wolf. And he described them as being more human-like. He didn't come right out and say fingers and toes, but he said they seemed more human. And he said there was something about the face as well, which again mirrors the same cave painting of that deer. He said there was something about the face that had human tendencies. Well, that was in his diary or his journal, and that was recorded. And we have that. I don't have it somewhere. But unfortunately, the body of this beast disappeared. We don't know what happened to it. But the killing stopped. And so people believe that what they had was not a wolf. They're saying it was too intelligent. It was too successful to be able to do this for over a year and kill 100 people, men, women, children, to elude hunters. It couldn't have just been an animal, no matter how wily that animal may have been, how cunning that animal may have been. It had to be human. And then Chastel's observations, made it seem like it was. It's interesting because I went to these various villages in France, and they're small little villages, but almost every one of them has some kind of a memorial, like in the town square, to either somebody killed by the wolf or to the wolf itself. There's one of a woman, she's got like a pitchfork or something, and you can see the wolf is rising up on its hind legs, and it's huge. And she's got this pitchfork, and she's trying to jam it like in the belly. And that's a statue in one of the towns. There's even a museum in Saugues, which it's Saugues, which is one of the towns where the beast was roaming and killing people. And you can go in it, and it's a little hokey. They have these dioramas set up. You walk into a room and it's dark, and then the lights go on, and you see these, plaster figures hunting, and then the lights go off and you go into another room, So it was a little hokey. But they had a lot of documentation, a lot of the copies, photocopies of the some of the early reports and everything else of this thing. So that's one of the probably most famous one that does have a historical basis. And to this day, we don't know what it was. Although when you talk to the people in these towns, as I did, they still say stuff like, well, my great-great-grandfather told us about the story. He left a diary or whatever, and people then were convinced that it was a werewolf. And, some people even say now that they are too, that they believe that. So that was interesting. I mean, it was, documented historically. But again, who knows? And unfortunately, without having the body, it would have been great if they had maintained that somehow.
Yeah. It's interesting because these aren't just stories. These are actual documented events, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were reports back and forth from people in the town to the king. The army was reporting to the king was reporting back to the people. So, yeah, there was all this, documented paper trail of what people were experiencing, which doesn't necessarily mean 100% that, well, then it was a werewolf. But there was a lot of documentation behind it, which is more than you can say for most of the stories that you come across.
All right. Well, Spartan and Tony have a couple questions. I suppose I can just put it all into one for you here, John. It says, sure. What does it mean to run into a shapeshifter, and is there any way to recognize one?
Huh. Well, I don't know what it would mean to run into one. I haven't had that occasion. How would you recognize one? Well, it's interesting. There's a guy in Upper Ohio here, where I live, upstate. His name is Guy, G-U-I, Guy Savelli. And that name might be familiar to some people. There was a book called, I may have the title a little bit off, but it was something like The Men Who Stare at Goats. And it was about the Army's secret. The what?
That was a great movie.
Yeah, so they made a movie of it. So it was about the Army's, secret studies about mind control and what you can do with the mind. Well, Guy Savelli, I interviewed him, was the man. He was a martial arts expert, and he also did a lot of mind work. He did a lot of meditation and mental work and things like that. And he was the guy that worked with Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces. He worked with the government. And his job was exactly what the movie is about. He was the one that was training military people to be able to use their minds in a way to, hurt somebody or do something. And they did a study with him. They put him in a room by himself, and there was a goat, G-O-A-T. This is probably where the title came from. Outside, something like, he said it was about 50 yards away or something from him. He couldn't see the goat. The goat couldn't see him. He was in an enclosed building. But he concentrated on this goat, and he concentrated on basically delivering some, sort of powerful jolt to it. And the story goes that he knocked the goat down. And he knew it. He said, okay, I just knocked the goat down. And when we went out there, the goat was like stunned, and getting up and all wobbly and everything. Well, where I'm going with the story is that Guy Savelli, as I said, was also martial arts expert. And I talked to one of his students. And his student told me that at one time, he and Guy, the teacher, Guy Savelli, were in a bar. And they were just having a drink, and they're minding their own business. And they ran into this loudmouth drunk who didn't know Guy, and Guy didn't know him. But for whatever reason, he started picking on Guy. And he started, threatening him, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to punch you, all this kind of stuff. So the student says, he said, I don't know what happened. He said, all I know is Guy stood up, and he looked at the man, and he said he just made eye contact with him. And this guy was a big drunk, and he's like, ready. He's all ready to swing at Guy. And the student said all Guy did was just direct his gaze at the guy and just look at him. And he said, I saw what happened. And he said, I don't know how to explain it. He said, Guy's face just changed. He said it took on the appearance of, he said, it looked to me like a tiger. He said, but it changed. He said, I know it sounds crazy, but there was a change, a physical change. And he said, when that happened, he said the drunk just suddenly like turned white. And then the guy's drunk, right? But he was sober enough to like, he started backing off and said, hey man, okay, sorry man, and just backed off and left. And then after that, there was, Savelli was fine. And the student said to him, what happened? And Savelli just said something like, oh, that's the tiger, or something just very casually, like, oh, that's the tiger in me, or something along those lines. So to answer the question of how do you know if you're with a shapeshifter, how can you recognize one? I would say if you're in a situation like that, if you're in a bar, if you're in a situation, it may come out. I don't think there's any other way to know if somebody has that ability or not. But, the student certainly said that. All I can say is I saw a tiger in that room.
Yeah. Jared? Jared, you there?
Yeah, it's like the train evening, so I was on silent.
Oh, okay. I think some of our listeners like listening to the train go by when it goes by sometimes.
Oh man, it's been ridiculous. It's literally been every 6 minutes, every size train. We should just do a train episode and get train people on. That's what we should do.
Yeah.
So Lee Palace has a question. Moonlight frequency changes sensitivity to people, unusual blood or DNA. Any connection with people that always stay awake at night times, moonlight? I don't know. Is there, so Michael mentioned something earlier, John, and I wanted to bring it up with you. And this sort of ties in with the blood or DNA thing. From a shape-shifting standpoint, have you experienced any stories where people aren't just turning into like another animal or something else? Have you come across anything from a standpoint of, I don't know, in quotes, paranormal, where people are experiencing someone else's shape-shifting?
So like witnessing, seeing it happen?
No,
or?
like actually maybe jumping into their shoes or experiencing on a collective consciousness level. I mean, is it possible that they're like the synesthesia, one of the abilities is to sense and feel what someone else is doing. Is it possible that they can jump into their, not possess them, not like that, more like just like second sight?
Yeah,
like
I got you.
The Roman version or the ancient version of second sight.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. I haven't come across that anywhere. But as we were talking about before, if those abilities do exist, if we can tap into them, then I would say the possibility of that happening, I would say there is a possibility of that happening. I haven't heard it. I mean, I haven't come across it any place. But
okay, just curious. I mean, it's such an odd thing. I mean, I just figured that there's I just thought it was, I don't know. I'm wondering if it has ever been, like the Sufis in the middle, the idea of collective dreaming or collective shape-shifting. I was just wondering if that, because once you get into this, the mythologies and whether it's Greek, Roman, or Eastern, what about specifically Eastern? We focus on this side of the universe. Right. Is there anything that really stands out? I know you mentioned the Japanese, but is there anything that stands out on the Eastern side as far as shapeshifting goes?
I guess the Japanese were big into it. I had some things from China as well, but they're similar stories of shapeshifting. But what I think happens there more, again, is looking more at this sort of Buddhist doctrine in a way, the idea of the mind and using the mind more. I think that's what stands out in more of the shapeshifting from any of those sort of Asian areas, but I don't know if anything else stands out other than those.
What about the moonlight frequency?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Obviously we hear the stories of the werewolves and the full moon. Is it just werewolves in the full moon, or is it kind of all shapeshifters in the full moon? And does the full moon sort of, I guess, change the frequency to be so where they can actually change easier?
Well, it's, as far as I know, the only thing I've ever heard associated with the full moon were werewolves. But the interesting thing is, a lot of the stories that I found, and a lot of the even documented cases, and I say documented, but not necessarily real. I mean, people made reports, but didn't have anything to do with a full moon. I mean, it doesn't really seem that werewolves need a full moon to transform. That's certainly become sort of a Hollywood icon. But I didn't find anything in my research that actually said it required the frequency of a full moon or anything like that to make that transformation.
All right. So that's more of like a movie idea.
I think so. I mean, it's the same thing like with vampires. What does a vampire transform into? A bat, right? That's what everybody says. Oh, a vampire transforms into a bat. Well, before Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, vampires didn't transform into anything. They were just vampires. They rose from the dead, and they were people. They were dead people, feasting on you, but they didn't ever do any kind of transforming. But Bram Stoker writes a scene in Dracula where a bat is flying against the window where Lucy is trying to get in, and then next thing you know, it's instantly, the bat's gone, but standing by her bed is Count Dracula. So meaning that he transformed into a bat. But prior to that, there wasn't any transformations from vampires. So what I'm saying is, our popular culture has added a lot of its own mythology and lore to werewolves, to vampires, to fairies, to any kind of shapeshifters, which may really drift far from what their original roots were, their original stories were. And I don't have a problem with that, because to my mind, that again shows the resiliency of these characters, that they still echo with us, they still resonate with us, and we amplify that. We even add more to it. There were never female werewolves. I mean, you look back in the old werewolf stories, they were always men. They were never female. And it wasn't, and even the earlier movies, like The Wolfman was probably one of the earliest werewolf movies. Actually, there's one from 1920 something, I forgot, where it is a woman, an Indian woman, Native American woman. But prior to that, there's none. Now we have werewolves. There's a lot of female werewolves. Frequently they're teenagers. Frequently it has a lot to do with sexual maturity and everything else like that. But, again, this is something that we've added recently within the last maybe 25 years or so.
Okay, so the Native American, that'd be more like Skinwalker, right?
Well, Skinwalkers, yeah. Skinwalkers are also shapeshifters, but they're shamans who have the ability to shift. And they usually take the form of a wolf, coyote, something along those lines. But they're basically evil folk, They're not good people. And their whole intention of shapeshifting is usually to wreak vengeance on somebody.
So, but all of the shapeshifters are evil, right? Not just the Skinwalkers. Are there any good shapeshifters stories?
Are good shapeshifter stories? Oh yeah, plenty. And that's part of what I was saying about the idea of a shapeshifter. We tend to think of them always as evil, like shapeshifting for some evil intention. But there are stories where shapeshifting makes somebody better, because through that shapeshifting, they're able to acquire powers that they didn't have before, maybe more strength or something. But then they do it for a good purpose. Think of some of the Marvel superheroes. Think of somebody like the Hulk. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we know he's not real, right? But when he goes into this rage, he usually does something. I mean, he's not a bad guy. He's not an evil guy. He generally does something maybe not totally good, but he's not out to kill people. So yeah, there are definitely good shapeshifters.
Yeah. Lee Powell says, but the sunlight and moonlight has a huge effect on us.
That's true. Gravitational forces and all that, true. Absolutely. I'm just saying that I haven't found in my research that there's really any authentic basis for saying that you needed a full moon to become a werewolf.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Jared?
Yeah, so side note on this, just because I like a little, when it comes to vampires and this sort of stuff, I do like the macabre point where we find these old burials with the stake in the heart or chained still within their coffins because they're afraid of them rising up or leaving.
Right.
Are there examples specifically in medieval burials of dealing with shapeshifters like they dealt with vampires and other potential rising from the dead types?
I haven't found that attached to shapeshifters per se. I certainly to vampires, believing they would rise from the dead. Now, again, depending on what point of time we're talking about, when the idea of them becoming shapeshifters occurred, then in essence, yeah, you'd be putting down a shape-shifting vampire, right? But early on, it was just to keep the vampires down because they didn't necessarily think they were shapeshifters, but they were certainly vampires.
Interesting. The subject matter covers, I think, a lot of, for me, it's just like a lot of the legends that the Greeks or what they were discussing, from Solon and the stories from the Egyptian priests, and you people are ancient, you people come from a much greater, more advanced society, and you're in a time of decay, of falling, and we get to this conversation now about the Younger Dryas, and we get back to these genetic memories, genetic strengths, genetic abilities that are, and for everyone listening, when we talk about the moon, all frequencies, resonance, what we're starting to understand, that the whole world, that there's not a separate, like electricity, dielectricity, gravity as we know it, are not separate subjects. We're learning a lot more about Tesla again, Steinmetz. We're starting to understand that the worst thing you can do is lean on Einstein. And from what we're learning is that frequencies and these energies were understood much differently than they are now. So we look at it now more mystified and more of what we don't know. We just go with the the mystery end of it. And I think whether it's the moon or where we are in the universe and the solar system as we're traveling through, you name it, and if our ionosphere is not filtering it, I mean, we're being exposed to different frequencies and waves. And I think that with a more organized and terraformed planet, those interactions, I don't think my big description, John, is banging on the blinky board. They, for 1,000 years, somebody bangs on the left and it turns orange, and you bang on the right, it turns red. Somebody walks up 1,000 years later and says, "Why are you banging on a 747 control panel?" And sometimes what's worse about that is that you're getting a reaction out of the cockpit, out of the control panel. It's not only worse, it's not only that you're not supposed to bang on it. That's just like that's the landing gear indicator that keeps blinking because you bang hard enough, and the red button does something else. But you've now mystified the process for 1,000 years, which that's still a thing. And on top of it, if for the last 1,000 years you've gotten a 60 or 70% or even 40% agreement, like if you like a 8-ball, if you've mystified the perspective onto it, and somebody walks up and says, "Well, you're in a 747. This is a plane. It flies." One, you're burned as a heretic, and two, God forbid you've been asking the blinky board questions and you're right even half the time. Now there is no going back on what that technology really is. So the memories of shapeshifting, like turning into a werewolf, or transmuting the human body or another animal, or creating animals, or creating, having genetic technology, turns into this deified, mystified, absolute, witchcraft and that's how we describe things: sorcery, witchcraft. Nanotechnology would absolutely look like Merlin the Wizard. It's our cell phones. What do you do with an Android after the battery runs out and you have a really dark black mirror? Who's going to ultimately take it apart and use the bits? And so I think over time we've morphed the technologies into a giant blinky board.
Well, I think you're right. Sounds good.
But this ability that keeps popping up, these, six-fingered humans, six-toed humans, and double-rowed teeth, and whether you're talking about Cherokee little people or moon-eyed people, or if you're talking about giants, the reality is that it seems we seem to really not have a full paleoanthropological view of what's been on this planet. Not to mention, we started this talking. I mentioned, our actual paleoanthropological evidence from the beginning was that, hey, the story we told ourselves about the theory of evolution doesn't fall within the time frame you guys described it. So what do you do with these Denisovans event that we didn't know existed until a few years ago and weren't willing to talk about? What do we do with Neanderthal, and then a whole nother 14% human, and these elongated skulled humans that all seem to have bred together at least 50,000+ years ago, not very far from that volcanic eruption? But how do elongated skulled people fall in on your shape-shifting panel?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I haven't researched them, but yeah.
I mean, that would be wouldn't it be interesting? And again, it'd be great if anyone listening wanted to chat with a friend that was in any, archaeological, biological department of any kind. And if anybody of these billion-dollar institutions that are all about learning about the past want to pick up elongated skulled humans that are with different suture lines and form magnum, and these are literally different looking humans, and we have no genetic testing from a major institution. And I mean, it's outside. You can't even call it a conspiracy. It's bizarre. And what do we do if we have a completely different snapshot of the human experience when? Why are we? It seems elementary that humans are great storytellers, so it seems obvious why we would like Lord of the Rings. But what if even the period of the movies that we all love, or the books, it's describing a time much later and further along than in a prior time when those giant megalithic king stone statues and everything existed in their premium, and here we are, drawn to these epic stories where you have multiple races living together, or multiple creatures communicating. It's in the Bible. The baby will be laid on the snake den, and the cobra will not bite, and you'll talk to animals. I mean, we're talking literally Mr. Doolittle here. We're gonna, it wasn't until after the flood, like, oh well, it's a free for all now, so eat your friends, and they're not going to talk to you anymore.
John, are there any records of any shapeshifters being captured, or do we have any dead ones?
Not that I know of on both scores. Yeah.
All right, and I guess not. And just one more question I have, and I suppose we gotta wrap it up. We're out of time. Would you consider ghosts to be shapeshifters, or are they kind of stuck being a ghost, like of whatever they were before?
Yeah, I mean, I think again the idea of a shapeshifter, I talk about that for the most part, that voluntary ability to control. So a ghost can't really control his fate, right? I mean, he can't come back and say, "Oh, I'm going to be a person now. I'm going to shift." So no, I wouldn't consider them shapeshifters. And yet the caveat that I say is that in Japanese folklore and ghost lore, they can in fact come back and shapeshift. So there you go. But I would say that, the traditional ghost is not a shapeshifter.
All right. Well, what are you working on now, John? You got any new books coming out? You working on anything new and exciting for everybody?
Well, I'm still kind of looking at the shapeshifter idea, especially as I talked about the idea of the psychology. I'm sort of outlining a novel now, but my agent is trying to sell a novel for me that is a good old-fashioned paranormal ghost story. So we'll see how that goes. But.
All right. Well, you want to tell everybody where they can find you?
Sure. So my website is easy. It's johnkachuba.com. JOHNKACHUBA.com. My schedule of appearances up there. There's a blog that people can put up interesting stories that they have, and look at some of the ones that I've posted. All my books are available up there. But actually, my books are in bookstores too. Like Shapeshifters just came out. Well, it came out in 2019 toward the end. It was actually a finalist in 2020 for the Bram Stoker Awards for the Horror Writers Association. So it's pretty proud of that for achievement in nonfiction.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a good it's a good hit. So so it should be in bookstores, but if you can't find it in bookstores, you can certainly get it on Amazon. You can get it through my site. You can get it through Reaction Press, which is the publisher, Reaktion. So yeah, that's about it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Everybody, the link for John's site is in the description box below. Go there and check it out. Lots of awesome stories there and some neat things. And Jared, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Cool. We're going to be at America's Stonehenge May 1st. We'll be doing a lecture. You can grab a ticket for a virtual event if you don't want to come to America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire. By the way, big letdown. It's not the Salem everyone's thinking of, but it is Salem, New Hampshire. And you can join virtually at notaliens.com, or you can grab a ticket and be there. And that's about it for now.
All right, awesome. And remember, you can always find us. Just go to the internet, www.conflictradio.net, for all our latest shows. Apparently, my website and podcast catcher doesn't allow me to have too much stuff on there set up. So I guess going forward in the future, a lot of the archived videos are going to remain on YouTube, but they're going to be for members only. So as we go further and further into this podcast, the older and older shows are going to start dropping into members only area. It's just a way for everybody to support the show, and you want to check out some of the older shows, you could do that. You can also join to be a member and just support the show just because you like the show. Remember to like the video and subscribe to us on YouTube if you're not already. You can always find us on Apple iTunes. Do go ahead and give us a rating and review there if you like. Until next time, batten down the hatches and be safe.